Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History for Relaxing channel. Tonight we step into a winter night where the floor is basically a sheet of ice wearing a mud costume. You're standing at the edge of a small serf household, the kind that looks harmless in daylight and becomes a personal insult after sunset. The air itself feels sharp, like it has opinions about your life choices. And yes, you probably won't survive this if your entire winter strategy is vibes and one thin hoodie. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and drop your location and local time in the comments, because it is always fascinating to imagine you listening to medieval misery from a perfectly heated room. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push through a low doorway that forces you to bow, not out of respect, but because the building is built like a stubborn little cave. The first thing that hits you is the smell. It is damp earth, old smoke, wool that has fought too many battles, and something sour that might be cabbage or might be history itself. The second thing is the cold, not as a dramatic gust, but as a patient presence. It sits in the walls, the floor, the packed clay, the gaps in the timbers. It does not rush you. It waits, confident that you will eventually lose. Inside, the space is dim, lit by a small fire that looks less like a roaring hearth and more like a tired orange eye refusing to close. In many peasant homes across medieval Europe, a single room does almost everything: cooking, mending, eating, storing, and sleeping. That is a mainstream fact that comes up again and again in descriptions of rural life. One room means one heat source. One room also means your entire existence smells like whatever you last boiled. You take a step and feel the floor answer back. Frozen floors do not mean the surface is a neat sheet of ice like a skating rink. It is worse. It is uneven, stubborn, and conductive. Packed earth can hold cold like a memory. Rough planks can be drafty and mean. Stone thresholds can feel like they were carved directly from winter's bad mood. Even if the fire has been burning, the heat rises and hangs higher, while the floor keeps its grim little secret. You look up at the roof beams and notice the ceiling is low. That is not an accident. A smaller space is easier to warm, at least in theory, but theory is for people with spare time and spare firewood. Here, fuel is precious. The fire is fed carefully. Like a pet you cannot afford to make too happy. It must last, and it must not eat the winter stores faster than the household can replace them. Smoke curls into the rafters and refuses to leave quickly. In some places and periods, there is no proper chimney, just a smoke hole or a leaky roof that lets the room breathe like a wheezing animal. Your eyes sting. Your throat gets that dry scratch that makes you want water, except water is also cold, and everything is a little complicated now. Still, that smoke has a strange advantage. It can slow the escape of warmth, and it can keep insects down. A cozy trade. You get heat and fewer bugs. In exchange for feeling like you're slow roasting yourself in a polite fog, there is movement in the dim. A family shifts around the fire, quiet in the way people get when they are saving energy and words. Work has been done all day, and cold makes rest feel urgent. Nobody is performing comfort. They are performing survival. You notice clothing is layered, patched, and practical. Wool if they have it, linen underneath if it is available, maybe a heavier outer garment that does double duty as daytime coat and nighttime cover. When people imagine no blankets, they miss the point that clothing becomes the blanket. Everything you own is a tool, even your belt is a tool, even your dignity is optional. You glance for a bed. You do not see a raised frame with a mattress and a cheerful quilt. You see a corner that looks slightly less terrible than the rest of the floor. That is the luxury suite. Maybe there is straw piled there, maybe dried rushes, maybe a sack stuffed with whatever can be spared. The texture is not soft. It is less direct contact with frozen ground, which is a very medieval definition of comfort. You crouch and touch the bedding material with your fingers. It is dry on top, colder underneath, and it smells like field and dust. Straw insulates because it traps pockets of air, and air is a stubborn little heat holder when it is trapped. That is the physics doing you a favour. The problem is that straw also crushes, shifts and breaks down. It can turn into a thin, scratchy layer that needs replacing. It can hide pests. It can hold damp if the room is humid. And humidity is not a rare guest in winter huts full of breathing humans, simmering pots, wet boots, and smoke. Here is a quirky tidbit that feels small until you imagine living it. In some regions, people use bracken, fern, heather, or dried leaves as bedding. Not because it is charming, but because it is what grows nearby and can be gathered without paying anyone. It is a botanical version of make it work. You're not picking a mattress, you're picking what the landscape allows. The floor is not just cold, it is a thief. Heat moves from warm bodies into cold ground with cruel efficiency. That is why being lifted matters. Even a simple board under bedding can reduce heat loss. But boards cost wood, and wood costs labour, and labour is already spent. So the household chooses what it can. Straw, spare cloth, maybe a sheepskin if a luck has ever visited this doorway. The cold is constant. The solutions are variable. You listen to the sounds. The fire's soft snap. The occasional cough. The faint scuff of feet on earth. Outside, winter presses against the walls. The wind finds seams and tests them like fingers searching for a loose thread. A draught slips in and brushes your ankles, and you instantly understand why people obsess over blocking gaps. It is not comfort culture. It is not aesthetic home improvement. It is basic bodily negotiation with nature. You shift your weight and realise another quiet detail. People are exhausted. That is a resource too. Hard labour makes sleep heavier, even when conditions are terrible. Your body does not need perfect silence and a memory foam mattress. It needs rest. And if rest is on a floor that feels like a chilled loaf of bread, then so be it. Still, historians still argue whether the harshest sleeping conditions were universal or more situational, because homes varied by region, wealth, climate, and time period. Some peasants have better insulation, better construction, better access to fuel. Some do not. A single word like serf hides a whole range of lives, and winter has different teeth in different places. You lower yourself toward the bedding corner and feel the air grow colder near the ground. Like the room has layers. Up higher, smoke and warmth hover. Down here, the cold collects and settles, proud of its work. You tuck your hands close and try not to think about how modern humans pay money to sleep on cooling gel mattresses. Congratulations, you have achieved the premium cooling experience. There is no refund. You lie down fully dressed, because taking clothes off would be like politely handing winter a knife and asking it to get creative. The fire dims a little. Shadows thicken. In the soft crackle, the room feels both crowded and small, a whole household holding its breath. The cold does not vanish, it never does. But in this moment, you understand the strategy. Reduce contact with the ground, keep what warmth you can, accept discomfort as normal, and let fatigue do the rest. You wake up in the dark because your body has a talent for noticing misery on schedule. The air tastes like yesterday's smoke and the floor tastes like winter, even though you are not licking it. Thank you very much. You shift your leg and feel the cold reach up through the bedding like a petty little ghost that refuses to move on. This is the part nobody warns you about. It is not just that the ground is cold. It is that the ground never stops being cold. It is a battery that stores chill all day and spends it on you all night. You sit up slowly, careful not to fling straw everywhere like confetti at a festival called Poor Choices. Your hand presses into the surface and you feel the difference between the top layer and what lies beneath. Above is a thin pocket of trapped air, slightly warmed by your body. Below is compacted earth that has been soaking in winter for weeks. If the hut sits on damp soil, the cold feels wet, and wet cold is the kind that crawls into your bones and starts paying rent. Floors vary depending on place, craft, and how many resources people can spare. Some households have beaten earth, smoothed and hardened by years of feet, sweeping and spilled broth. Some have plank floors that look like an upgrade until you discover the gaps. A plank floor can leak air like a sieve. The wind can creep up from below, turning your sleeping spot into a draft buffet. Stone floors exist too, especially in certain regions or in buildings tied to wealth and authority. And stone has one special gift. It steals heat faster than your patience can refill. Here is a mainstream historical fact that turns out to matter a lot. Medieval homes often have very limited insulation in walls and floors, especially for poorer rural households, and much of the warmth comes from managing a single heat source and reducing exposure rather than heating the entire space. That means the floor is not treated like something to make cozy. It is treated like something to tolerate while you focus on not freezing. You notice how the room itself behaves like a simple machine. Warm air rises, cold air sinks, and the lower you are, the more you pay for gravity's little hobby. Even if the hearth is going, the best warmth collects higher up. The rafters get the good deal. Your ankles get the bill. If you stand, your chest feels a little less punished. If you lie down, your entire back becomes a heat donation to the earth. This is why people get clever about microclimates. You might not be able to warm the whole hut, but you can make a small zone less brutal. A corner can be chosen because it is furthest from the door, or because it is shielded by storage, or because the wall is thicker there. A sleeping area can be tucked behind a bench or a chest. Not for privacy, for physics. You're building a tiny pocket where air stays still. Because still air is warmer than air that keeps getting replaced by outdoor revenge, you run your fingers along the base of the wall and find cracks where the structure meets the ground. Timber shrinks, mud plaster dries and fractures. A house breathes, and in winter that breathing feels like it is inhaling your warmth and exhaling your hope. People patch gaps with whatever they have. Straw stuffed into seams, rags wedged under the door, lumps of clay pressed into holes. A door might have an extra hanging cloth, not because it is stylish, but because it slows the draft. A simple curtain can be worth more than a prayer in the middle of the night. Then there is moisture, the quiet accomplice. Even without snow coming inside, dampness sneaks in through soil, through wet boots, through cooking steam, through the breath of people and animals. Moist air makes cold feel sharper. It also makes bedding worse. Straw that seems fine at dusk can feel clammy by midnight if the hut is humid. The colder the surfaces, the more moisture condenses. You do not need to understand the science to feel the result. You just need to roll over and discover that the spot you're moving into is somehow colder and wetter. Like the floor is playing a prank. A quirky tidbit from rural winter life is how some households treat the floor itself as something to maintain for warmth. In some places, people repeatedly smear or tap the earth with mixtures that can include clay, dung, and plant material. Yes, dung. Hold your applause. When it dries, it can help seal cracks, firm the surface, and reduce drafts and dust. The smell is not a dream, but neither is hypothermia. It is the kind of practical solution that makes modern people wrinkle their noses while medieval people keep living. You look around and notice pathways in the room, places where feet travel most. Those strips are smoother, more compacted, and sometimes colder to the touch because they have been pressed hard. The sleeping corner, if it is used consistently, might be slightly raised by layers of old bedding that never fully goes away, a slow built-up mound of straw, leaf, and cloth. That mound is not luxury. It is insulation created by time, like a sad little mattress grown from repetition. Some homes use simple platforms or benches, especially where carpentry and wood are more available. A raised surface can break the direct heat drain to the ground. Even a low wooden board under straw helps, but wood can be scarce, and also needed for tools, repairs, fences, and fuel. So every plank has to justify itself. A bench might do triple duty, seat by day, storage by evening, sleeping surface for someone who needs to be off the ground most. Now comes the uncomfortable truth about pain tolerance. When cold is normal, people calibrate their expectations differently. You might think, this is unbearable. They might think, this is winter. That does not mean they like it. It means the bar for good sleep is set lower, and the body learns to do what it must. You pull your knees up, curl tight, reduce surface area exposed to the air. Your posture becomes a survival shape. Historians still argue whether descriptions of peasants sleeping directly on bare frozen ground, are sometimes exaggerated by outsiders who want a dramatic contrast between rich and poor. Writers with warm beds have always enjoyed describing cold floors in moral tones, but even if the most extreme stories are embellished, the basic struggle is real. Thin insulation, cold surfaces, and constant drafts make the lower part of the house the hardest place to exist. You stand and stamp your feet, a reflex so universal it feels ancient. The sound is dull on packed earth. You imagine how a plank floor would creak, how stone would ring. Every material has its own kind of suffering. Earth is damp and heavy. Wood is drafty and splintery, and stone is merciless. Pick your villain. Your eyes adjust and you spot the doorway. It is not sealed tight. It cannot be. The latch is simple. The frame is imperfect. That gap at the bottom is a highway for cold. People stuff it. They block it. They lean a board. They hang a cloth. And still, the air moves. Winter is patient and it has all night. You lower yourself again toward the sleeping corner, more aware of the floor's personality now. You arrange the bedding to create thickness under your hips and shoulders. Because those points press down and lose the air pockets first, you keep your feet tucked so they do not stick out into the cold zone like two little sacrifices. You breathe slowly, because fast breathing wastes warmth and makes the air feel harsher. The floor does not soften. It does not negotiate. It simply exists, cold and solid, doing exactly what physics tells it to do. And your whole job, tonight, is to be smarter than a patch of dirt in January, which is a humbling life goal, honestly. The fire is not a hero. It is more like a tired co-worker who shows up late, does the bare minimum, and still expects you to be grateful. You shuffle closer anyway, because warmth is warmth, and your standards have dropped to the floor, literally. The hearth glow paints the room in weak orange, and you can feel the heat change depending on whether your hands are open or clenched, whether your palms face the flame or hide from it. Heat is picky like that. It rewards exposure and punishes modesty. The room is smoky, not in a dramatic tavern way, but in a slow, constant haze that has seeped into the timbers. The rafters are dark with soot. If you rub your thumb along a beam, it comes away black. People breathe this. They cook in this. They sleep in this. And it is not just an accident. In many rural homes, especially earlier in the medieval period, a central hearth with poor ventilation is common, and smoke escapes through gaps or a hole in the roof rather than a proper chimney. That is a mainstream historical fact that shows up across regions, even if details vary. You blink and your eyes water. It feels like the smoke is trying to season you. The cough you suppress is not just discomfort, it is etiquette. Noise wastes energy and attention, and nobody wants to draw focus to themselves in a space where everyone is already managing hunger, cold, and fatigue. The smoke stings, but it also clings to the air in a way that can slow heat loss. A clean, well-ventilated room might be healthier, but it can be colder if it dumps warm air outside too quickly. This is not a lifestyle choice, it is trade. You watch how the household treats the fire like a carefully rationed resource. Fuel is not infinite. A bigger fire means more warmth right now and less warmth later. It also means more time gathering wood, more time cutting it, more time hauling it, and more pressure on the surrounding landscape of serfs. Labour is already owed to a lord. Time spent on fuel can steal time from everything else. So the fire burns low, fed in small doses, like a slow drip rather than a feast. You lean in and feel your cheeks warm while your back stays cold. That split sensation is weirdly maddening. Your face starts to relax. Then your shoulder blades remind you that the room is still winter with a roof. The heat does not fill the space. It creates zones. There is a warm semicircle near the flames, a chilly ring beyond that, and then the outer edges where the walls meet the night. People do not just sit by the fire for comfort. They work there because fingers need warmth to sew, to mend, to carve, to twist rope, to repair tools. Cold makes hands clumsy. Clumsy hands break things, and broken things break lives. So the hearth is a workstation. The fire gives you enough to function, not enough to luxuriate. It is like charging your phone to 12% and saying, "Good luck, buddy." A quirky tidbit from winter household practice is that the soot and smoke are not only tolerated, they can be useful. Smoke can help preserve meat hung in the rafters and discourage certain pests from settling in bedding or stored grain. The house becomes a mixed-purpose space, part kitchen, part workshop, part storage, part very small smokehouse. That does not mean it is pleasant. It means it is efficient in a world where efficiency is survival. You glance upward and notice dark strips where smoke has flowed and cooled, leaving patterns like fingerprints. The ceiling is not just a lid, it is a heat trap, and also a place where warmth gathers. If you could sleep up there like a bat, you might be happier, but sleeping arrangements are limited by gravity and whatever furniture exists, so you are stuck in the colder layer, where air pools and drafts crawl. This is where scholars and historians argue about the lived experience. Historians still argue whether smoky interiors were as widespread in later medieval centuries as they were earlier. Because chimneys and improved hearth designs gradually spread in some areas, especially in wealthier households and certain regions, the pace of that change is uneven. Some places adopt better ventilation sooner, some keep older designs for generations. The result is a patchwork of winter nights. Some people breathe easier, some people cough more, some people get a little more warmth, some people get a little less. The hearth itself can be a simple arrangement. Stones to contain the fire, a flat area of packed earth, maybe a hanging pot hook if the household has the hardware. If there is a chimney, it might be crude, pulling smoke upward but also pulling warm air out with it. A better draw means less smoke and sometimes a colder room. Again, the trade. If the chimney does not draw well, smoke lingers and warmth lingers too, along with the sensation that you're living inside a damp scarf. You watch someone tend the embers. They do not just throw wood on and hope. They nudge coals together. They spread ash. They manage airflow. Ash can insulate embers and keep them alive longer. If the fire can be kept as coals through the night, morning becomes easier. Starting a fire from nothing costs time and effort, and sometimes flint and steel that not everyone has readily available. Keeping embers alive is like protecting tomorrow. There is a small moment where you notice the difference between radiant heat and the heat of the air. The air is still cold, but the face of the hearth radiates warmth directly into you, like sunlight that does not care about the temperature. That is why you keep turning your hands, warming palms, then backs, then fingers, like you're rotating bread over a toaster that barely works. The fire also shapes sleep timing. When the flames are higher, people may linger longer, stretching out tasks that keep them close to the warmth. When the fire drops, sleep becomes less a choice and more a surrender. You move toward bedding because staying upright in the cold feels pointless when you cannot keep feeding the hearth. The night's warmth is rationed, and once you have spent it, you spend your body heat instead. You try a small experiment. You step away from the fire. The warmth falls off quickly. 2 paces and your hands feel less alive. 4 paces and your nose cools. By the time you reach the sleeping area, the difference is undeniable. The hearth is not heating the room. It is heating the people who can crowd close enough to claim its generosity. 3 light jokes are required here, so let's make them count without waking you up. 1. The hearth is basically an ancient space heater with the customer service of a grumpy cat. 2. If you breathe in deep, you get free smoke flavouring, like the world's worst candle. 3. The only thing rising faster than the warm air is your appreciation for modern insulation. You settle down again, and you realise the smoke is not only in the air, it is in the fabric of life here. It coats hair, wool, and skin. It seeps into bedding. It follows you into sleep. It is a constant reminder that warmth costs something, even if the cost is just sore eyes and a throat that feels scraped. The fire dims, embers glow like tiny red stones. The room's temperature drops a fraction, then another. You pull your body closer to itself, a compact shape, conserving. The hearth has done what it can. It has given you a brief island of heat in a sea of cold. The rest is up to your body, your clothing, your stubbornness, and whatever luck you have left. You crawl toward the bedding and immediately realise how optimistic the word bed is. This is not a springy rectangle waiting to hug you. This is a pile, a textured mound of whatever the household can gather, keep, and tolerate. Straw is the main ingredient when fields are nearby and harvest leftovers exist. Rushes show up where wetlands and riverbanks provide them. Dried leaves get involved when nothing else is handy and forests are close enough to risk a collection trip. Whatever it is, it rustles, it pricks, and it shifts under your weight like it is trying to escape responsibility. You press your palm into it and feel the science working in real time. The top layer is airy, and that air is the point. Trapped air slows heat loss. A thick layer means your body does not directly gift its warmth to the ground. In plain terms, straw is not comfort. Straw is insulation with attitude. The moment you lie down, your hips compress it and the air pockets collapse. The mattress becomes thinner exactly where you need it to be thickest. So people fluff, add, and redistribute constantly. If you see someone shaking out bedding, it is not for freshness, it is for physics. This is where a mainstream historical fact matters. Straw and rushes are common bedding materials for many rural households in medieval Europe, sometimes replaced or refreshed periodically, and sometimes simply topped up as older layers break down. That is not a minor detail. It is a whole maintenance routine, a quiet seasonal task tucked between everything else. Bedding is like a roof. It only matters when it fails, and it fails slowly. You shift your shoulder and get poked. Straw has sharp ends. Rushes can be tougher than you expect. Dried leaves can crumble into bits that find your collar and irritate your neck. There is no smooth cotton sheet separating you from the reality of plant matter. The bedding is a relationship. It demands negotiation. You find a position that spreads your weight, then you try not to move again because movement is what makes the sharp parts find you. Now the part that makes modern listeners sit up and say, wait, what? Cleanliness is not a separate category here. Bedding is not sanitized and laundered the way you imagine. It is aired out when weather allows. It is turned. It is replaced when it becomes too rotten or too infested. But it is never sterile, and it is rarely dry all the way through in winter. Dampness creeps in from the floor and from the air, and bedding can hold that damp like a sponge made of grass. That damp makes you feel colder even if the temperature does not change. A quirky tidbit is that some households use aromatic plants mixed into bedding, not as a luxury spa feature, but as a practical attempt to discourage pests and mask odours. Think herbs, wildflowers, or whatever smells strong and grows nearby. It is medieval air freshener, except it comes with the bonus of pokey stems and the risk that you brought in more bugs by accident. Nature is helpful like that. You listen closely and you can almost hear tiny movements. Maybe it is imagination, maybe it is a mouse, maybe it is a flea doing its night shift. Parasites thrive where humans and animals share close quarters and where bedding is organic and reused. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs are not modern inventions. They are ancient roommates who never pay rent. You scratch your ankle and immediately regret it because scratching is loud in the quiet. And also because once you start, your brain becomes a dedicated itch machine. People develop habits around this. They might beat bedding with sticks outside when the weather is mild enough. They might hang cloth in smoke. They might rely on the hearth's heat to dry things a little. None of it is perfect. This is a constant low-level battle, and winter limits your options. You cannot easily drag everything outdoors and air it for hours when the wind is sharp and daylight is short. You notice that bedding is often placed in the best spot available. Not the prettiest. The best. It might be near the wall that leaks the least. It might be closer to the hearth, though not so close that sparks become a surprise. It might be tucked behind furniture to reduce drafts. That placement is a form of planning. A household might not have many choices, but it uses the choices it has. Historians still argue whether people regularly slept on loose piles on the floor everywhere, or whether raised sleeping platforms and simple bed frames were more common in certain regions than popular imagination suggests. Evidence from inventories, illustrations, and excavations can point in different directions. Some peasants own simple bedsteads or benches used for sleeping. Some do not. Some share one raised surface while others sleep on the floor nearby. The variability is the key. The image of universal floor sleeping is neat and dramatic, but real life tends to be messier. You pull a sack or cloth bundle closer and discover another sleeping trick. A pillow can be anything that fills space under your head. A folded cloak, a bag of spare clothes, a small sack with straw inside. It is not about softness. It is about lifting your head and keeping your neck from stiffening so badly you wake up feeling like a rusty gate. Even that is not guaranteed. You might wake up sore anyway. Pain is part of the package. There is also the issue of sound. Straw creaks and crackles when you move. That means anyone trying to shift quietly is basically doomed. You roll and it sounds like you're unwrapping a snack. In a crowded one-room household, that noise matters. It can wake others. So people learn to settle and stay, to accept one position for long stretches, because the group's sleep is part of keeping the next day possible. You test the edges of the bedding and find thinner spots where the ground is closer. You push straw from the centre outward, building a thicker layer under your hips and shoulders. It is a small engineering project conducted in the dark. When you finally lie back down, you feel the difference. Not comfort, but less punishment. 3 light jokes, soft enough not to jolt you. 1. Straw bedding is basically the original crunchy snack experience, except you are the snack. 2. If you wanted a natural mattress, congratulations, you're now in direct contact with nature's elbows. 3. The only thing softer than this bedding is the concept of self-care in a feudal economy. As the room settles, the bedding slowly warms where your body touches it. The air pockets near you hold a little heat. Your clothes trap more. The cold still exists, but it becomes background instead of attack, and that shift is everything. You learn to measure success by small changes. Less draft, thicker straw, fewer sharp pokes, fewer itches. A decent night is not a blissful dream. It is simply a night where you wake up still able to move. You do not undress. That is the first rule, and it is not written anywhere because it does not need to be. The room itself teaches it. The moment you loosen a layer, cold slides in like it has been waiting politely for permission. So you keep everything on, shirt, tunic, leggings, whatever outer wrap you have, and sometimes even your hat. Sleep is not a separate activity with a separate outfit. Sleep is simply your body going offline while still wearing its armour. Clothing in this world is not abundant. A peasant wardrobe is built for durability and repair, not variety. Wool is prized because it holds warmth even when damp. Linen is common for underlayers when available because it is workable and can be washed more easily than wool. But washed is seasonal and situational, because water is cold and labour is constant, so garments are aired, brushed, patched, and kept moving. A cloak can be a coat, a blanket, a curtain, a bundle, a baby wrap, and an emergency bag. It is an entire survival system that happens to be wearable. Here is a mainstream historical fact with real consequences. Many medieval peasants sleep in their everyday clothes, especially in cold seasons, because dedicated sleepwear and spare bedding are limited, and because layers reduce heat loss. This is not a quirky habit. It is the difference between resting and shivering until dawn. You tug at your belt and pause. A belt keeps clothing closed and traps warm air, but it can also dig into you if you lie wrong. Some people loosen it slightly, some keep it tight because drafts find every opening. You feel the choice in your ribs, comfort versus containment. You decide on containment because the cold is not kind, and your body can complain quietly. You test your sleeves. Loose cuffs leak warmth. Tight cuffs block drafts but restrict movement. You roll a sleeve down and tuck it into itself. A small trick that makes your wrists feel less exposed. Wrists and ankles are weak points. They are like windows in a house. Cover them well and the whole system performs better. Leave them open and everything feels worse. Footwear becomes its own problem. Boots might stay on if the floor is wet or if the leather is stiff and hard to remove in the dark. But boots can be cold and can trap damp. And damp is the enemy. Some people remove boots but keep foot wraps on, using strips of cloth or wool to insulate and protect feet. Foot wraps can be adjusted, dried by the hearth when possible, and replaced more easily than a boot. If you have ever struggled with a wet sock in winter, imagine that but with fewer options and more consequences. A quirky tidbit from everyday practice is how people use small scraps of cloth as targeted insulation, like medieval heat patches. A spare rag wrapped around a knee, a strip tied around an ankle, a folded piece tucked under a collar. It is not fashion. It is micromanagement of warmth. You learn to notice which part of your body complains first, and you respond with a scrap of fabric like you are plugging leaks in a sinking boat. You pull your cloak around you. It is heavy enough to feel reassuring, but not thick enough to perform miracles. Still, it adds one more layer of trapped air, and trapped air is your closest thing to technology. You fold it under your side a little, creating a barrier between you and the bedding that has gone flat. Cloth helps because it spreads pressure and reduces how much straw collapses. The straw still shifts, but less. You are building a nest out of textiles and stubbornness. There is also the head. Heat escapes through exposed skin, and that is why hats matter. A simple cap can change the whole night. Your ears are sensitive, and when they get cold, you cannot stop thinking about it. You pull a cap down and feel immediate relief. It is not dramatic. It is subtle, but subtle is what you live on here. Subtle improvements add up. Historians still argue about the exact way peasants arrange their clothing at night, because most written records come from people who are not living this life daily. And images can be symbolic rather than documentary. Some depictions show people sleeping in minimal garments. Some suggest full layers. The truth likely varies with region, season, and household resources, but the logic is consistent. In a cold room with limited bedding, clothing becomes insulation. You notice how people keep clothing close even while sleeping. A cloak is not tossed in a corner. It is wrapped, folded, or used. Spare garments are not displayed. They are stored carefully, sometimes even used as bedding padding because fabric is valuable and warmth is immediate. A wool garment under your back is not just comfort. It is an investment in tomorrow's ability to work. There is a small ritual of tucking. You tuck cloth under your body to reduce drafts. You tuck the hem of your tunic to stop air from rising up inside it. You tuck your feet under your other leg. You tuck your hands between thighs or under armpits. Your posture becomes a closed circuit for heat, keeping warmth circulating within your core. When you breathe, you can even angle your face to warm your hands slightly, like a tiny personal heater. It is not glamorous, but it works. Then there is hair. If you have long hair, it can be a layer. You can spread it under your neck or over your ears. It sounds strange, but in a night where every fraction of the warmth matters, you use what you have. You also avoid unnecessary exposure. You do not roll onto your back if it makes your chest feel too open to the cold air. You curl, you fold, you compress. You make yourself smaller because smaller means less surface area giving heat away. 3 light jokes, gently delivered. 1. This is the original sleep in your jeans lifestyle, except the jeans are wool and the stakes are your toes. 2. Layering is not a fashion trend here, it is a religion, and the cold is the strictest priest. 3. If someone tells you they love minimalism, you want to hand them one cloak and point them at a frozen floor. You settle into stillness and feel how clothing changes the texture of the night. The cold still exists, but it is buffered. The drafts still try, but they meet fabric instead of skin. Your body's warmth is less likely to leak away in big, obvious losses. You're not warm, you're protected enough, and in this life, enough is a word people learn to respect. Sleep is not a solo hobby here, it is a group project, and the grading rubric is simple. Whoever stays warm enough to work tomorrow passes. You glance around the dim room and realise how little empty space there really is. People and possessions fill it. The sleeping area is not a neat line of separate spots. It is an arrangement, like a puzzle solved by necessity. Bodies lie close not because everyone is affectionate, but because cold punishes distance. You ease down near others and feel the air change. A lone body warms a small bubble. Several bodies warm a bigger one, and the warmth lingers longer. You can sense it with your face. The difference between open space and the pocket near another person's shoulder. It's not exactly cozy. It is more like standing near a crowd at a winter market and quietly admitting it helps. This is where a mainstream historical fact enters with a slightly awkward cough. Bed sharing is common across medieval society, including among peasants. Because dedicated beds are limited, rooms are small, and warmth is easier to keep when people sleep close together. Modern ideas of personal sleeping space do not apply neatly here. Privacy is a luxury. Heat is a need. You find a spot and immediately become aware of the choreography. You cannot just sprawl. Sprawl is for people with spare space and spare firewood. Here, bodies align like logs, shoulders to shoulders, knees tucked, careful not to kick someone in the ribs at midnight. Someone shifts, and you adjust. Someone coughs, and the whole group flinches, not out of fear, but because noise pulls everyone closer to waking. Waking means feeling cold. Cold means resentment. Resentment means a long day. The warmth comes with side effects. You can smell other people's workday, the sweat that dried under wool, the smoke that soaked into hair, the faint tang of fermented food on breath. It is intimate in the most unromantic way possible. Your nose learns to stop reporting it as an emergency. You breathe through your mouth for a moment, then regret it, because cold air down the throat feels like swallowing winter. Bodies also mean moisture. Breath adds humidity. Damp clothes dry slowly, releasing that wet chill into the air, but despite that, the net effect is warmer than sleeping alone. A cluster shares heat, and heat is the currency of the night. If you want a modern comparison, imagine a phone battery pack that only works if 4 people plug in at once. Ridiculous, but effective. A quirky tidbit from cold weather folk practice is that people sometimes arrange sleepers by vulnerability, not by preference. Children. The elderly, or the sick, might be placed more centrally in the huddle where warmth is strongest. The strongest adults might take the outer edge near drafts, acting as a human windbreak. Nobody gives a speech about it. It happens because everyone understands the math. You tuck your hands in and feel your fingers warm faster than they would alone. Someone's back radiates through layers of cloth. It is a gentle, steady warmth, not like the sharp bite of a fire. Your body relaxes in response, muscles unclenching as if permission has been granted to stop guarding every inch of skin. The cold still exists at the edges of the group, but inside the cluster, it becomes more distant, like it has been pushed back a few steps. There is also a social layer to this. If you are in a household, sleeping close reinforces belonging. It keeps people aware of each other's breathing, each other's presence. That can be calming, even if the circumstances are harsh. But it can also be tense. Not everyone wants to share space with the person who snores like a collapsing barn. Not everyone appreciates the guy who fidgets like he is trying to dig a tunnel. Still, cold has a way of making cooperation feel less optional. Historians still argue about how much of this communal sleeping was driven primarily by warmth versus space limitations versus cultural norms. The sources can be tricky. Some accounts emphasize poverty and lack of furniture. Some emphasize that bed sharing is simply normal across classes, with people of higher status also sharing beds for companionship and practicality. The motivations overlap, and the experience varies depending on household size and regional custom. You notice the rhythm of breathing around you. It is uneven at first, then steadier as people drift off. Breath is warm, and some sleepers turn their faces toward the center of the cluster, so they inhale slightly warmer air. You copy them. It helps. You also learn to guard your face from drafts, because cheeks and noses go numb quickly. Someone pulls a cloak up higher, and the fabric forms a little wall that reduces airflow. Your eyes feel heavier. Then comes the problem of movement. If you wake in the night and need to reposition, you must do it carefully. A sudden shift can break the heat pocket. It can expose someone to a draft. It can make a child wake and cry, which is disaster in a room where everyone is trying to sleep through cold. So you make small adjustments. You slide an elbow. You tuck a foot. You keep your motions slow. You become a quiet animal in a burrow. 3 light jokes, whispered in spirit. 1, this is the original family plan, but instead of saving money, you are saving body heat. 2, personal space is available, but only as an idea. 3, if you ever wanted to know what it is like to be a sardine, congratulations, you are now in the medieval tin. You feel the warmth build gradually, not instant, but cumulative. It is like adding coals to a small ember of comfort. Your core stays steadier, your hands stop aching, your feet, tucked near someone else's legs, hold heat longer. The group becomes a single organism of sorts, a cluster that breathes, shifts, and settles into stillness. The cold presses at the edges like a fence, but inside, the fence holds. As you drift, you understand the practical genius of this arrangement. It is not sentimental. It is not a quaint tradition. It is a survival technique shaped by night, weather, and the simple fact that human bodies produce heat. In a world where the floor wants your warmth and the air wants your breath, the best answer is sometimes to share what you have, even if it means you fall asleep listening to someone else's stomach complain like a small thunderstorm. The warmest object in the room is not the fire, it is the animal. Not because the animal is magical, but because it is alive, breathing, and running its own internal furnace all night. You notice it in the way the air shifts near a cow's flank, or the way a pig's body heat fogs the space around it. If you have never stood close to livestock in winter, prepare to be humbled. That warmth is real. It is also accompanied by smells that could knock a candle off a table. In many rural settings, animals are kept close to people, sometimes under the same roof or in an attached space, especially in colder climates or during harsh seasons. That is a mainstream historical fact tied to practical needs. Protection from theft, protection from predators, and yes, sharing heat. It is also about convenience. When you rely on animals for milk, labour, and future meat, you guard them like savings in a living form. You step closer and hear a slow exhale, wet and steady, and you feel how that breath changes the air. It is warmer than the room. It smells of hay and rumen and the truth about agriculture. The animal shifts its weight, hooves scraping lightly, and the sound is oddly reassuring. A living creature is here. It survived the day. It intends to survive the night. There is comfort in that stubbornness. But the arrangement is not neat. Animals bring moisture. Their breath adds humidity. Their bodies release heat and also damp. And damp makes cold feel sharper when you step away from them. They bring manure, which can be managed, but never fully ignored. They bring fleas and other pests, which can wander. They bring noise. A sudden snort can wake you. A restless shuffle can make the whole room feel less safe. A quirky tidbit that sounds like folklore but shows up in various rural traditions is that some people interpret animal behaviour at night as a kind of weather signal. If livestock cluster tightly, if they become unusually restless, if they refuse to settle, it can be taken as a sign of shifting weather. It is not a scientific forecast, but when you live close to animals every day, you notice patterns, and your brain turns patterns into warnings. You weigh the trade without anyone asking you to. Warmth versus sanitation. Security versus stench. A pig's heat could keep the edge off the cold, but a pig is also a pig, and pigs do not care about your bedtime routine. Cows are calmer, but they are massive and need space. Chickens might roost in the same structure, adding a faint rustle and a dusty smell. Even small animals contribute, though their warmth is minor compared to a cow's living radiator effect. Historians still argue how common it truly is for peasants to share the same living room space with animals on a regular basis, because conditions vary widely by region, period, and the type of building. Some evidence suggests separate byres or stables are common, sometimes attached, sometimes nearby. Other evidence points to shared spaces in certain circumstances. The popular image of everyone sleeping beside a cow can be an exaggeration in some places, and entirely normal in others. The truth depends on architecture, climate, and local custom. You look at the building with new eyes. If there is an attached animal area, it can act like a buffer zone between the human space and the outside. A byre can block wind, reduce drafts, and hold warmth. The wall between people and animals is not just a divider, it is insulation. The animal side is warmer, and that warmth can seep through. Even if you never lie down beside a cow, you can benefit from its presence through the structure itself. You move into a spot where the animal's heat is close enough to feel, but not so close that you're sharing air directly with its breath. You find the sweet spot, like standing near a heater that is also judging you. Your hands warm slightly, your face relaxes, and then your nose catches up and demands a complaint form. You swallow it down. Complaints are for people with options. There is also an emotional layer. Animals are wealth. A cow can be the difference between eating and not eating. A horse or ox can determine how much land can be worked. Keeping them close is not just about warmth. It is about guarding the household's future. At night, when the world is dark and law can feel far away, proximity is protection. If something moves, someone hears it. If a door creaks, the household wakes. Animals become alarm systems, sometimes loud, sometimes subtle. The animal's warmth is not evenly helpful. If you get too close, you risk overheating one side while the other stays cold, a weird imbalance that can make sleep restless. You also risk being bumped. A cow shifts, and you're reminded that you're a fragile human near a creature built like a boulder. That reminder is healthy. It keeps you from getting too comfortable, which is a cruel joke in a room like this. 3 light jokes, carefully contained. 1. The cow is the only reliable heater here, and it accepts payment in hay, not gratitude. 2. The pig's warmth is great, but its bedside manners are aggressively non-existent. 3. If you ever wanted organic heating, this is it, and it comes with a fragrance profile you cannot unsmell. You settle down and listen. The animal's breathing is slow. It is almost like waves, steady and repetitive, and it can pull you towards sleep in the same way a fan hum does in a modern room. There is a reason people find livestock noises familiar and calming when they grow up around them. The sounds become part of the night's fabric. You also notice how the animal changes the behaviour of air. Warmth from its body rises as creating a gentle current. That current can reduce the bite of still cold near the floor. But it can also stir odours. It is a moving trade. Still, when your toe stops screaming for a moment, you decide you can live with a little extra smell. You might even find yourself grateful, which is a surprising emotion to feel toward a cow at midnight. In the dim, you understand that warmth is gathered from every available source. Fire, bodies, clothing, and the quiet furnace of an animal that does not know it is helping you. You do not romanticize it. You simply accept it as one more method in a long list of methods, each one imperfect, each one shaped by necessity, and each one meant to get you through the night without the cold taking more than it should. Your brain gets inventive when your toes start bargaining for their lives. In a world with limited fuel and thin bedding, people do not just accept cold like a sad destiny. They try tricks. They test ideas. They learn what helps for an hour and what helps for a whole night. You can feel that spirit in the small objects near the hearth, in the way people handle heat like it is precious soup you do not want to spill. You notice a stone near the embers, dark and dull, sitting close enough to warm but not so close it cracks. That is the first hack. Thermal mass. Heat a dense object, then carry it to the sleeping area. The stone holds warmth longer than air does. It gives off heat slowly, like a patient little sun. A household might use stones, bricks, or even thick ceramic pieces if they have them. This is not fancy technology. It is simple physics used with care. A mainstream historical fact fits here. People in pre-modern rural households often use heated stones, bricks, or embers managed in ash to provide localized warmth, especially for hands, feet, or beds. It shows up in various forms across cultures because it makes sense. You cannot heat the whole room, but you can heat a small companion object and let it do its job. You lift a warmed stone carefully, wrapping it in cloth so you do not burn your palms. The cloth also slows heat loss and protects skin. You place it near your feet, not against bare flesh, because burns are the kind of injury that ruins work for days. The warmth spreads through the cloth, then into your socks or foot wraps, and your toes relax like they have been granted citizenship again. Another trick involves ash. Hot embers buried in ash can stay warm for a long time with less oxygen, like a slow cooker for fire. People rake embers into a small pile, cover them with ash, and sometimes place that near where they sleep. Not on bedding, not near straw, but close enough to radiate. This is risky. Straw and cloth burn. A spark can ruin everything. So the practice depends on skill, caution, and how desperate the night feels. A quirky tidbit that sounds almost too clever for a frozen hut is the use of a foot warmer sack. A simple cloth bag filled with warm material. It could be heated grain, warm sand, or a stone wrapped securely. The bag makes it portable, reduces direct contact, and can be tucked near feet or against the belly. It is the ancestor of a hot water bottle, except water might freeze, and a bag of warm grain is less likely to leak. Also, grain is valuable, so not everyone would waste it on warmth unless the cold is truly punishing. You watch someone warm a ceramic pot near the fire, empty, then set it upside down near the sleeping area. The pot radiates heat, and also creates a small sheltered pocket of warmer air inside its dome if you slide your feet near it. It is a tiny tent for toes. The effect is modest, but modest improvements matter. The pot must be handled carefully, because ceramics can crack with thermal shock, and a cracked pot is not just a loss of comfort, it is a loss of cooking ability. Then there is the trick of timing. You do not heat everything early and waste the warmth while everyone is still awake. You heat a stone later, closer to sleep, and you move it just before lying down. This is a strategy of maximizing benefit. If you can coordinate the last feeding of the fire with preparing a heat object, you get a warmer start to sleep, and that first hour can determine whether you drift off or shiver awake. Historians still argue how widespread these specific heat hacks are in medieval Europe, versus being more common in later centuries or in different regions. Because everyday household practices are often under-recorded, the absence of mention does not mean absence of practice. People rarely write down the obvious tricks that everyone knows, especially when the writers are not the ones sleeping on straw. You notice another approach, insulating the heat source itself. A stone wrapped in cloth stays warm longer. A warmed brick placed inside a wooden box lined with fabric becomes a safer heater. Even a small coal pan exists in some households, though it is more common in wealthier contexts because it requires a metal container and careful handling. When used, it is kept away from straw and monitored, because carbon fumes and fire are real dangers. Safety is a sliding scale here, constantly negotiated against cold. Your fingers start to feel a little better, so you try warming your hands directly. You hold them near the stone, then slide them under your tunic at your abdomen. Your core is warmer than your extremities, and you can borrow that warmth if you're patient. You also learn that warming hands and feet changes your whole mood. Cold extremities can keep you awake even if your core is stable. Fix the toes, and the rest of you stops panicking. 3 light jokes, as gentle as a candle. 1. This is basically medieval gadget culture, except the gadget is a rock and the unboxing is you burning your thumb. 2. If you ever wanted a heated accessory, congratulations, it is stone chic this season. 3. Your toes are so grateful they might start writing thank you notes. You place the warmed stone near your feet again and notice how it affects the microclimate under your cloak. Warmth rises from the stone, filling the small space between fabric and body. Your feet warm, your calves follow, and your whole body relaxes in a chain reaction. It is not the kind of heat that makes you sweat. It is the kind that lets you stop clenching. You also notice how people avoid overheating the sleeping area. Too much warmth near straw can dry it to the point of becoming more flammable, and too much warmth followed by cooling can increase condensation. So the goal is not heat for heat's sake. The goal is steady, controlled warmth, the minimum that keeps joints from aching and sleep from breaking. You lie down with your warm stone companion, tucked safely, wrapped well, and positioned so it cannot roll into bedding. You listen to the small crackle of the hearth in the distance, and feel the stone's slow gift. It is one of those simple tricks that feels almost magical, not because it defies nature, but because it uses nature's rules in your favour. In a winter hut, that is as close to power as you get. A draft is not just a little breeze. In a winter hut, a draft is a thief with perfect timing. It waits until your body finally relaxes, then it slides under the door and touches the only exposed bit of skin you forgot to cover. Your brain snaps awake like a startled cat. You do not even have to open your eyes to know what happened. Air moved. Warmth left. Now you're negotiating with cold again. You start paying attention to the building like it is a puzzle with hidden leaks. The door is the worst offender. It is wood, swollen and shrunken through seasons, set into a frame that never quite matches it. The bottom edge leaves a gap where air can glide in. People stuff that gap with cloth, straw, or rolled plant fibre. A thick rag is a treasure for this job. Even a bundle of dried grass can work, though it sheds bits and needs replacing. The goal is not a perfect seal, just a slower exchange of air. Here is a mainstream historical fact that matters more than it sounds. Medieval rural houses often have imperfect joins, cracks in wattle and daub, gaps around doors and shutters, and limited glazing, which makes controlling drafts a constant challenge. That is why warmth depends so much on blocking airflow and creating smaller sheltered spaces inside a larger cold room. You move to a wall and run your fingers along the daub. Some areas are smooth and firm, others feel crumbly, where the mixture has dried and pulled away. A crack might be thin, but it is enough. Air will find it. It always does. People press fresh clay into the crack when they can, sometimes mixed with straw to help it hold. It is not pretty, but it works. If the wall is made of logs, gaps between timbers can be stuffed with moss or plant fibre. Moss is surprisingly useful. It compresses, it holds shape, and it slows drafts. It is nature's weather stripping. Windows, if they exist, are another weak point. Many poor households have small openings rather than glass. They might be covered with a wooden shutter, oiled cloth, animal parchment, or nothing at all when things are broken. Covering a window blocks light and also blocks air, but it can trap smoke. Everything is compromise. Still, at night, the shutter goes up and any cloth is pulled tight, because darkness is already here, and warmth matters more than moonlight. You notice a trick that is almost architectural. Internal barriers. A hanging cloth can create a smaller sleeping nook. A chest can block a draft line. A bench can act as a windbreak. People build miniature rooms inside the room, not with walls, but with objects. This is the same logic as camping in a tent inside a cold cabin. It keeps your warmth closer to you, and it makes the air around you less restless. A quirky tidbit is the use of door curtains that look decorative but are really draft traps. A thick cloth hung over a doorway can catch cold air like a net. If the cloth is old and heavy, even better. It can also become a multi-purpose item. During the day, it might be moved aside. At night, it becomes part of the insulation system. It is a curtain with a job description. You crouch near the sleeping area and notice that drafts travel along the floor like low rivers. Cold air is denser, so it sinks and flows under obstacles. That means your ankles and feet are the first to feel it. It also means that raising bedding even slightly, or creating a ridge of straw around the sleeping spot, can disrupt the flow. You push straw into a shallow berm, a little wall meant to break the draft. It is not perfect, but it makes the cold air detour, and that can be enough to keep your feet from feeling like they're dipped in snow. Historians still argue about how much insulation behaviour was deliberate knowledge passed down versus simple trial and error repeated by each household. Some practices feel like learned craft, sealing walls, layering materials, arranging furniture for warmth. Others feel like instinct. Huddle, block the door, avoid the draft. The line between tradition and improvisation is blurry because a lot of knowledge in rural life is practical and unspoken. You also notice that sleeping placement can change based on wind direction. If a strong wind hits one wall, the drafts shift. A household that knows its building will choose a different corner on especially harsh nights. This is not dramatic. It is subtle adaptation. People read their home the way sailors read a boat. They know where it leaks. They know where it creaks. They know what to do when winter presses harder. Then there is the roof. Even if it keeps out rain, it might not keep out air. Thatch can be thick and insulating, but gaps appear. A roof can breathe. Sometimes that is good, letting smoke escape. Sometimes it steals heat. Some households add extra layers, patching with straw bundles, repairing damaged spots, tightening what has loosened. Roof maintenance is winter survival, but it cannot always be done when snow and wind make climbing dangerous. So you live with the roof you have and hope it does not decide to become a problem tonight. 3 light jokes. because drafts deserve to be mocked. 1. The cold air is basically a freeloading guest that keeps showing up uninvited. 2. Your home improvement budget is one handful of straw and a prayer. 3. The open concept floor plan is great until the concept is frost. You tuck yourself into the sleeping nook and feel how small changes add up. A rag under the door, a shutter pulled tight, a crack stuffed with moss, a chest placed just so. None of these create warmth from nothing, but they stop warmth from escaping so quickly. That is the real game. You do not beat winter, you slow it down. You breathe and notice the air feels slightly calmer, less moving. Still, air feels warmer even when the temperature is the same. It is the difference between standing in cold wind and standing in cold shade. You can survive cold shade with enough layers. Cold wind is a bully. You settle your feet behind the straw berm, pull cloth tight around your shoulders, and let your body rest in the pocket you have built. The hut is still a simple structure facing a brutal season, but now it is also a system of little defences, each one improvised, each one maintained by hands that know exactly what a draft can do to a night. Cold makes you hungry in a way that feels rude. Your stomach does not politely whisper. It announces itself like it owns the place. That is because warmth is not only about fire and cloth. Warmth is also about fuel inside you. When you eat, your body burns calories and produces heat. It is slow, steady, and deeply unromantic. But it matters. You can feel it. A warm heaviness in the belly, a little less shaking in the limbs, a softer edge on the night. In rural medieval life, food is seasonal, repetitive, and precious. The evening meal is often simple: porridge, pottage, bread. Maybe beans or cabbage. Maybe a little salted meat if fortune smiles and stores allow it. That is a mainstream historical fact that shows up across many accounts of peasant diets. The details vary, but the theme is consistent. Heavy staples, often cooked in one pot, meant to keep bodies working. You watch someone ladle thick pottage into a bowl. Steam rises, and the steam alone feels like comfort. It warms your face and hands as you lean in. You take a spoonful and feel the heat travel down your throat into your chest, as if your body sighs in relief. The flavour is earthy. There is salt, maybe a hint of onion, maybe a scrap of fat that coats your tongue. Fat is important. It carries calories densely, and calories are heat potential. People may not speak in nutrition terms, but they know how they feel after a meal with more grease versus one that is watery. Bread is central. It is not always white and soft. It can be dark, dense, rough with grain, but it is reliable. You chew and feel your jaw working like a tool. The act of eating is work, but it is also warming work. The body heats itself a little in the process, and that small heat matters when the air is cold. Then there is drink. Water is cold and sometimes risky if sources are contaminated. Ale is common, often weak, and sometimes safer than untreated water because of the brewing process. It also provides calories. A mug of ale is not a party. It is liquid bread, and it can make you feel warmer, partly because it arrives at a less icy temperature and partly because it relaxes you. Relaxation helps sleep. Tension burns energy and keeps you alert. A little ale can ease the edge off the night. A quirky tidbit is how some people rely on hot or warm herbal infusions when possible. Not as luxury tea time, but as a way to get warmth without wasting much food. If there are dried herbs, a bit of honey, or even just hot water poured over plant material, the result can be a soothing drink that warms the hands and belly. It is not always available, and it depends on knowledge of local plants, but it exists as part of the household's practical toolkit. You notice another behaviour: eating late. Not too late, because you still need to settle and sleep, but close enough to bedtime that the warmth of digestion carries into the first part of the night. Timing becomes strategy. Eat too early, and you are hungry and colder by midnight. Eat too late and your stomach churns and keeps you awake. People learn a rhythm that matches their workday and the length of darkness. Historians still argue about how many calories peasants reliably consume in winter, and how much malnutrition affects their ability to stay warm. Some evidence suggests that in good years, rural diets can be adequate in calories, but limited in variety. Other perspectives emphasize frequent shortages, uneven access, and the fragility of the food system. The debate matters because warmth is not only a matter of shelter. A body short on fuel cannot hold heat well. You feel the difference in yourself after eating. Your hands warm a bit, your cheeks feel less tight. You're still in a cold room, but the cold feels more distant when your core is fueled. It is like adding another layer from the inside. You also notice sleepiness creeping in, the kind that comes after a heavy meal. That is useful. Sleepiness is a tool. It helps you ignore discomfort. There is also salt. Salted foods appear in winter because preservation matters. Salt helps keep meat edible. It also increases thirst, and thirst can be annoying at night when water is cold and trips outside are unpleasant. But salt has value, and preserved foods keep people alive. You taste salt and understand it as a form of planning. Someone did work months ago so you could eat this now, in the dark, with the wind pushing at the walls. You watch someone scrape the pot clean with bread, not wasting a drop. Waste is rare because scarcity is always close. Even the last bit stuck to the pot are calories. Calories are warmth. Warmth is function. Function is survival. It is a chain of logic that lives behind every small action, even if nobody speaks it out loud. 3 light jokes, served with the porridge. 1. This porridge is so thick it could qualify as building material. 2. Ale is basically medieval hydration plus vibes, responsibly rationed. 3. If you want a light dinner, you're in the wrong century and also in the wrong hut. You also notice how food connects to sleep culture. A fuller belly can make people drowsy faster, which means less time sitting in cold air. The household might choose to settle earlier on especially bitter nights, using food as part of the wind down. The warmth of a hot meal becomes the last big comfort before the fire shrinks and the room cools. When you finally lie down, the heat from digestion lingers. It is subtle but steady, like a small coal inside your chest. Your body uses that energy to keep your core warm. Your limbs still cool faster, but the center holds. The difference between an empty stomach and a fed one is the difference between shivering awake and drifting off. You breathe slower. The taste of grain and salt sits in your mouth. The room's cold remains, but your body's not starting from zero. You have eaten, and that means you have a little extra heat to spend. In a winter night with limited comforts, spending heat wisely becomes the closest thing to wealth. The cold is not only uncomfortable, it is a slow medical condition with a weather report. You notice it in the way joints complain when you try to straighten your fingers. You notice it in the sting that arrives when circulation returns. Like pins tapping your skin, pain becomes ordinary, and that is the scary part. When everyone around you treats soreness as normal, you start treating it as normal too, even when it is a warning. You shift and feel the ache in your knees and hips, the kind that comes from sleeping on uneven bedding and waking up stiff. The body can adapt to hardship, but it also accumulates it. Cold tightens muscles, it reduces dexterity, it makes small injuries feel larger. A cracked knuckle is not just annoying, it is a threat to tomorrow's work. A mainstream historical fact sits in the background of this whole night. Medieval peasants are physically strained by labour and often face higher risks of illness due to nutrition limits, crowded living conditions, and limited medical care. Winter intensifies these risks. When the body is cold and underfueled, it is more vulnerable. Even a simple cough can linger and become something worse. You listen to the room at night and hear coughs that sound dry and persistent. Some are smoke-related, some are illness, some are both. Smoke irritates lungs, cold air irritates lungs, damp air irritates lungs. Combine all 3 and you have a recipe for chronic breathing trouble. People clear throats, spit quietly, rub chests. These actions are so common they barely register, like background noise of survival. Then there is frostbite. The word nobody says out loud because saying it makes it feel like a prophecy. Fingers and toes are the main risk, especially if they stay exposed or damp. Frostbite starts as numbness, which is dangerous because numbness feels like relief. Then it becomes waxy skin, then pain, then damage. In a rural winter, Losing sensation can lead to losing function, and losing function can lead to losing livelihood. You look at hands, yours and others. Some fingers are swollen, knuckles enlarged, nails rough. Some damage is from work, some is from cold, some is from infection. A tiny cut can become serious if it stays dirty, and cold slows healing. People rely on simple remedies, clean water when possible, cloth wraps, herbal salves. The body does the rest, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. A quirky tidbit is the folk belief in warming and cooling foods and treatments, an old idea that certain items shift the body's internal balance. People may seek warming herbs, spices, or drinks, or rub certain oils on the skin, believing it helps fight the cold's effects. Some of these practices have practical benefits like improved circulation or comfort. Others are more symbolic. Either way, they create a sense of agency, which matters psychologically when winter feels like an unstoppable force. Sleep itself becomes lighter in deep cold. You might drift off, then wake because your feet chilled. You curl tighter, you drift off again. This fragmented sleep can wear you down over weeks. The body functions, but it does not fully recover. Irritability rises, mistakes increase. Small accidents happen more easily, and accidents in a world of sharp tools and heavy work are not small. Historians still argue how widespread severe winter health crises are in different medieval periods and regions, because records are uneven and often focused on dramatic events like famine or epidemics. Everyday suffering is harder to measure. Bones from archaeological remains can show signs of stress, malnutrition, and hard labour. But translating that into nightly lived experience is tricky. The debate remains because the evidence is real, but the details are incomplete. You feel your skin dry from smoke and heat fluctuations. Lips crack, hands chap. People might use animal fat or simple balms to protect skin, because broken skin is pain, and pain steals sleep. Even a thin layer of grease can reduce cracking in cold air. It is not glamorous, it is functional. The smell is not great, but nobody is auditioning for a fragrance ad. You notice how people manage sickness in a communal space. If someone has fever, the best place for them is near the warmth, but that also means they are near others. Illness spreads more easily in close quarters, especially when everyone shares air and space. Yet separating a sick person is hard when there is only one room. So care is mixed with exposure. Someone brings warm drink, someone checks breathing, someone adjusts clothing, and everyone else tries not to think too hard about catching it. The cold can also mask danger. If you are numb, you might not notice a developing injury. If your skin is chilled, you might not feel that your foot wrap is too tight and cutting circulation. If you are exhausted, you might ignore signs of infection. The winter night encourages you to conserve energy and avoid movement. But movement is sometimes what keeps blood flowing. It is a constant balancing act between stillness and circulation. 3 light jokes, carefully respectful. 1. Your body is basically filing a complaint with every joint at once. 2. Winter skincare here is apply grease, hope for the best. 3. The only immunity boost available is sleeping near warmth and thinking positive thoughts, which is, frankly, a thin strategy. You try to warm your hands by rubbing them, then you tuck them into your armpits. It looks silly, but it works. The armpit is a warm zone, protected and close to the core. People learn these body tricks because tools are limited. You also learn to keep your feet dry. Dry is warmer, wet is misery. If your wraps are damp, you change them if you can. If you cannot, you dry them near the hearth when the chance appears. A few minutes of drying can prevent hours of cold later. You drift towards sleep again with a new awareness that the cold is not just sensation. It is risk. It is wear and tear. It is the reason old age feels older, faster in harsh climates. It is why children are guarded, tucked into the warmest spots. It is why the household's small warmth tactics are not comfort hacks. They are medical prevention. Your breathing slows. Your muscles unclench slightly. You feel your heart steady, pushing warm blood out into places that want to go numb. You are not winning. You are maintaining. And maintenance is the quiet victory of winter nights. The kind nobody writes songs about, but the kind that keeps a household alive until the sun returns. The night is long and the calendar tells you how to survive it. Not with weather forecasts, but with bells, fasts, feasts, and rules that shape when people work, eat, rest, and gather. Even if you're not thinking about theology while your feet are cold, the rhythm of the church still wraps around daily life like an invisible schedule. It decides which days feel heavy and which days feel almost joyful, and that changes how sleep feels too. You notice the way darkness arrives early in winter and lingers. Without bright lamps, you do not stretch the evening endlessly. Tallow candles and oil lamps exist, but they cost resources and create smoke. So many households follow the light. When the sun drops, tasks narrow, people settle. The body naturally leans toward earlier sleep, not because everyone loves bedtime, but because there is less to do that is worth burning fuel for. A mainstream historical fact fits neatly here. The medieval Christian calendar includes many feast days and fasting periods that shape daily routines, including meal patterns and community gatherings, and those routines influence sleep timing and household activity. Fasting days might mean lighter meals, which can make the night colder and the body more restless. Feast days can mean heavier eating, more warmth in the belly, and a different kind of drowsiness. You imagine a day near a major feast. The household may have slightly better food, a bit more fat, maybe a taste of meat if it is available, maybe richer bread. People linger by the hearth longer, talking more, because morale matters. When you finally lie down, you do so with a sense of fullness and community that makes the cold feel less personal. On a fast day, the mood can be sharper, hunger makes cold louder, sleep becomes more fragile. There is also the practice of night prayer and early morning obligations. In monastic settings, people rise for prayers in the deep night. Peasants are not living like monks, but the influence of religious discipline still exists in the idea that rising early is virtuous and wasting daylight is sinful. Winter complicates that because daylight is short, yet work still must be done. So sleep is shaped by duty as much as by comfort. A quirky tidbit is the folk blend of Christian practice with older seasonal beliefs. In some places, people treat certain winter nights as spiritually charged, dangerous, or lucky. They might hang protective items, speak certain phrases, or avoid certain tasks after dark. These habits are not always officially approved, but they persist because fear and tradition are stubborn. If you believe the night is full of unseen threats, you may sleep lighter. If you believe certain rituals protect you, you might relax enough to drift off. You also notice how communal gatherings affect rest. On holy days, there may be more time spent at church or with neighbours, more talking, more movement. That social activity can tire the body in a different way than field labour. It can also reduce isolation, which matters during long winters. Social warmth is not the same as physical warmth, but it still helps. When people feel supported, they endure hardship better. Historians still argue how much the church directly shapes peasant sleep patterns versus how much peasants simply follow the practical demands of light, labour, and weather. The evidence is uneven. Written rules and sermons suggest ideals. Daily life often bends those ideals to reality. A priest might praise waking early for prayer. A farmer might prioritise sleeping long enough to survive the next day's work. The tension between ideal and practice is constant. You picture a winter Sunday. Work may be reduced, though not eliminated, because animals still need care. But the day feels different. People may wear their better garments. They may spend time in a colder church that is still somehow meaningful. The act of walking there and back in winter air is exhausting. When you return, you crave the hearth. Sleep that night may come easier because the day has included both effort and ritual. You notice small household rules too. Children may be told to stay quiet at night, not only out of discipline, but because noise wakes others and waking means cold. A household that values harmony at night is not being sentimental. It is managing thermal and emotional resources. Even argument is costly. It raises adrenaline, makes bodies heat briefly, then crash, and leaves everyone more miserable. So people learn to keep tension low when darkness falls. There is a sense of time that is different from modern clocks. You track the night by fire behaviour, by outside sounds, by the feel of your own body. Church bells in a village can mark hours, but not everyone hears them clearly. The main timepiece is the rhythm of the household, when embers are banked, when voices fade, when breathing steadies. 3 light jokes, church-friendly. 1. The medieval sleep tracker is just, "Are you awake and cold?" which is a very honest app. 2. Fasting day bedtime is basically you trying to sleep through your own stomach's dramatic monologue. 3. If virtue is rising early, winter is the strict teacher who does not care if you studied. You settle into the idea that rest is partly spiritual and partly practical. People might cross themselves before sleep, not as a performance, but as a quiet comfort. In a world where winter can kill, asking for protection is rational. Whether you believe it changes the temperature is another matter. But belief can change your calm, and calm helps sleep. You feel the household quiet down. The day's obligations, shaped by the season and the calendar, finally loosen their grip. The room becomes a slow breathing space, with the hearth as a fading heartbeat. You lie still, letting the mind stop counting discomfort and start drifting. The cold does not disappear, but the night becomes less like an enemy, and more like a long passage that everyone knows how to endure. One ritual, one meal, one quiet rule at a time. You travel without moving, the way the mind does when it tries to understand how different the same cold can feel. Winter is not one uniform enemy. It has accents. It behaves differently in a wet coastal village than in a high inland valley. It bites differently in a forested region than on an open plain. And the way people sleep changes with these differences, because architecture and habit follow climate like a shadow. In a milder area where winter is damp rather than brutally freezing, the problem is not only temperature, it is moisture. A wet cold seeps into cloth and straw and makes everything heavier and clammy. Houses in such places may focus on keeping rain out and drying things near the hearth. Thatch can be thick and insulating, but if it stays damp, it can become heavy and mouldy. Bedding might need more frequent turning and airing. Even in winter, people might prioritise drying foot wraps and outer garments, because damp clothing is a direct pipeline to misery. In colder continental regions, the problem shifts toward heat retention. People might build with thicker walls, smaller openings, and more deliberate insulation methods. A small window is not a sign of ignorance. It is a sign of knowing exactly what an opening does to warmth, a heavy door, a deeper entry space if possible. Sleeping arrangements become even more about picking the warmest interior zone and blocking drafts. Here is a mainstream historical fact that becomes obvious when you compare regions. Medieval building styles vary significantly across Europe based on available materials and climate, with different combinations of timber, stone, earth, and thatch used to balance durability, warmth, and cost. That variation means there is no single serf sleeping setup. There are patterns, but the details depend on where you stand and what the land offers. You imagine a northern area with long nights, deep snow, and fierce winds. Fuel might be abundant if forests are near, or scarce if the landscape is open. If wood is scarce, people burn peat, dried dung, or whatever combustible material they can gather. These fuels behave differently. Peat can smoulder and produce heavy smoke. Dung burns, but the smell is not exactly a bedtime candle experience. The fuel choice shapes the air, the warmth, and even the taste of the room. A quirky tidbit is that in some colder places, people develop a fondness for heated sleeping surfaces that use the structure itself, not just portable stones. Think of warm platforms near the hearth, or benches positioned to catch radiant heat. In some regions beyond Western Europe, heated masonry stoves or platforms exist in various forms. The specific technologies differ, but the idea is similar. Make a surface that stays warmer longer than the air. It is not universal, but it shows that humans keep inventing ways to fight the same problem. You shift your imagination to a mountainous region. Here, a house might be built partially into a slope for shelter from wind and for thermal stability. Earth around a structure can buffer temperature swings. It might keep the interior cooler in summer and slightly less punishing in winter. The floor can still be cold, but the wind pressure on walls might be reduced. That changes drafts, which changes sleep. In open plains, wind is the dictator. A hut exposed to constant wind can lose heat quickly through every seam. People respond with tighter construction if materials allow, or with clever placement near hedges, ditches, or clusters of buildings that break airflow. The village itself becomes wind protection. Houses huddle like people do, because clusters reduce exposure. Historians still argue how much regional variation in housing quality reflects climate adaptation versus social and economic factors like lordship demands, local traditions, and access to skilled builders. A cold region might encourage better insulation, but poverty can still limit what is possible. Meanwhile, a milder region might still have poor housing if resources and incentives are limited. Climate is powerful, but it is not the only author of architecture. You also notice the role of resources beyond wood. In areas with abundant stone building might be more common, but stone holds cold, so people compensate with thicker interior layers, more plaster, more hangings, more internal partitions, more bedding. In timber-rich areas, wood walls can insulate better, but gaps can be a problem, so the craft of sealing becomes essential. In wet areas, wood rots faster, so maintenance is constant. Every material comes with a problem, like a cursed gift. Food habits also shift by region, affecting sleep indirectly. In some places, as dairy is more available, providing fat and calories. In others, grain is king. In some coastal regions, fish plays a larger role. In inland places, preserved meat might be rare. The amount of fat and the timing of meals can change how warm you feel at night. You can survive on thin porridge, but you will feel colder doing it. 3 light jokes, travelling quietly. 1. Climate is the ultimate interior designer, and it has one theme: suffer but efficiently. 2. Wind on the Plains is basically a personal trainer yelling no warmth for you. 3. If your fuel is dung, your home scent profile is farm with notes of desperation. You imagine a region where winters are mild enough that people can sleep with fewer layers, but where sudden cold snaps hit hard because houses are not built for extremes. Those nights can feel worse because the household is unprepared. In harsher climates, people might be better practiced at winter routines. With thicker bedding stores and more deliberate draft blocking, familiarity can be a kind of insulation, not physical, but behavioural. You also picture the effect of community. A tight cluster of houses can share warmth indirectly, in the sense that people gather, trade fuel, share advice, and help repair leaks or roofs. In more isolated settings, a household might face winter with fewer supports. That isolation can make nights feel longer. Sleep is not only temperature, sleep is stress. Stress keeps the body awake. By the end of this mental travel, you understand that the question is not, how did serfs sleep on frozen floors, as if it is one scene. It is many scenes, shaped by mud, wind, forest, stone, rain, and custom. The floor might be frozen in one place and merely damp in another. The solution might be thick straw in one village and a raised bench in another. The constant is the human response: adjust, patch, layer, share, improvise, and accept that comfort is a spectrum, not a guarantee. Now you enter the part of the night where stories fight with evidence. You can almost hear the modern voiceover in your head, the one that wants medieval life to be either a cosy cottage fantasy or a non-stop misery compilation. Neither is fully honest. The truth is more awkward and more interesting, as people do sleep on floors sometimes. People also build simple beds. People share space with animals in some cases. People keep animals separate in other cases. The difficulty is that the past does not leave you neat receipts for every bedtime arrangement. You look at how knowledge survives. Some of it comes from written accounts, but many writers are clergy, nobles, or travellers with their own biases. They might describe peasant life to make a moral point, or to criticise, or to paint poverty as a lesson. Some of it comes from legal documents and inventories, lists of belongings that might mention a bed frame, a coverlet, a sack of straw, or nothing at all. Some of it comes from archaeology, from post holes and hearth placements and the wear patterns on floors. Each source is partial, and combining them is like trying to rebuild a whole song from a few notes. A mainstream historical fact that shapes this debate is that written medieval sources are uneven and socially skewed, often reflecting elite perspectives. While material evidence is fragmentary and requires interpretation, That is why simple questions like did peasants have beds can have complicated answers. A household might own a bed, but only one. Or a bed might be a wooden frame with a straw sack, not a mattress. Or a bed might be absent in one decade and present in another after a good harvest or a marriage. You imagine an illuminated manuscript scene showing peasants in a hut. The artist might exaggerate certain features for symbolism. A cramped space might be drawn to emphasize humility. A bare floor might be drawn to show poverty. An animal might be included because it signals rural life. These images are useful, but they can also be theatrical. They are not photographs. They are messages. A quirky tidbit from the world of rumour and myth is the persistent tale that peasants regularly slept on literal bare boards or ice-cold stone with nothing but misery and regret. Sometimes this gets repeated because it makes a good contrast with royal beds and embroidered hangings. It also fits a modern appetite for extreme stories. But even in poverty, humans seek insulation. A pile of straw, a cloak, a sack, a shared bench. Anything that reduces heat loss is likely to appear. The extreme version can be a distortion, even if hardship remains real. Historians still argue whether the common image of peasants and animals sharing the same room every night is a stereotype based on selective observations and later storytelling. Some scholars point to evidence of separate byres or attached stables that keep animals close but not inside the living area. Others note that in certain climates and economic situations, animals and people do share space more directly. The debate is not about whether it ever happened. It is about how often, where, and under what conditions. You also think about language. Words like bed and blanket can mislead. A bed might mean a simple straw sack on the floor. A blanket might mean a cloak or a rough wool cover. A mattress might mean a fabric case stuffed with chaff. So when a document lists a bed, it does not automatically mean what you picture. And when a document lists nothing, it does not automatically mean people slept on bare ground without any insulation. Sometimes people do not list the obvious, especially if it is low value or homemade. You notice how seasonal changes affect what survives in evidence. Straw bedding is replaced, it decomposes, it leaves faint traces. Wooden frames rot or get reused. Cloth wears out. What survives best are the durable items: metal, stone, sometimes thick wood in lucky conditions. That means the everyday soft world of sleeping is underrepresented. The past leaves you more about hearths and walls than about pillows. 3 light jokes to keep the tone sleepy, not academic. 1. Trying to reconstruct medieval sleeping habits is like trying to infer someone's personality from a single sock. 2. Manuscripts are the medieval version of social media, curated, symbolic, and occasionally dramatic. 3. The past refuses to fill out your survey, and it does so with confidence. You also consider the role of local wealth differences. Even among serfs, some have better conditions than others. A household with more land or a better harvest year can afford more cloth, more wool, maybe a simple bed frame. A household hit by poor yields or heavy obligations might have fewer resources and rely more on improvised bedding. Over a lifetime, conditions can rise and fall. A person might sleep on a bench in a good year and on thin straw in a bad year. The past is not static. Then there is the question of storytelling about suffering. Some modern retellings lean hard into the misery because it feels honest and gritty. Others lean into cosy rural simplicity because it feels soothing. But the lived reality includes both. Moments of warmth, humour, and community inside a harsh environment. A family can laugh while living in a cold hut. A child can feel safe while sharing warmth. A person can hate the cold and still find comfort in routine. That complexity is the truth that stereotypes flatten. You let the arguments settle in your mind like ash in a hearth. You do not need a single perfect answer to respect how people managed. What matters is that the techniques are practical. Insulation, reduced drafts, shared warmth, and careful use of heat. The myth is not that winter was cold. The myth is that people endured it with no strategies at all. Humans are too stubborn for that. They adapt, they patch, they improvise, they build habits. Even when they are poor, they are not passive. You lie still with that thought, and it feels oddly calming. The past is not a cartoon of suffering. It is a messy room full of decisions, compromises, and small acts of intelligence. And in that mess, you can hear something steady. The sound of people doing their best to get through the night. The night reaches that quiet depth where even the cold seems to slow down. Not because it leaves, but because your body stops reacting with panic and starts reacting with patience. You lie there, curled and layered, and the room feels like a sealed jar of breathing. The hearth is no longer a flame. It is a faint glow, a tiny red eye half closed. The outside wind still exists, but it is muffled now, as if it is speaking through a wall of wool and sleep. You notice the smallest comforts, the ones that would sound ridiculous in a modern bedroom tour. The fact that the air is not moving as much in your little sleeping nook, the fact that your feet are dry, the fact that your hands are not numb, the fact that your shoulders have stopped tensing up like they are trying to become a shield. These are small wins, and they add up. Someone nearby shifts and sighs, not in discomfort, but in release. Another breathes steadily, the slow rhythm of deep sleep. Even the animals settle into quieter sounds, softer shuffles, a slow exhale. The whole space becomes an organism that has finally decided it can rest. You're not alone, and that changes the emotional temperature even when the physical temperature stays low. A mainstream historical fact can sit here gently without interrupting the calm. Across medieval rural life, winter nights are navigated through routine and collective household practices, not by achieving constant warmth, but by limiting heat loss and protecting the body's core. The goal is endurance. The goal is waking. The goal is making it to daylight, then repeating it until the season loosens its grip. You feel your breath warming the cloth near your face. You angle your head slightly so you inhale air that has been trapped near your chest rather than air that has been pulled straight from the room. This is a tiny trick, but it helps. You tuck your chin, you keep your mouth from opening too wide. Cold air on the throat can wake you fast. Your body learns to sleep with the same caution it uses when walking on ice. A quirky tidbit that feels almost tender is how some people carry small personal items to bed for comfort. Not because they believe it changes the temperature, but because comfort changes the mind. A little charm, a simple cross, a token, a bit of cloth with a meaning. It does not heat the air, but it can reduce fear. Fear keeps you alert, calm lets you drift. In a long winter, emotional warmth matters too. Historians still argue about the exact balance between resilience and suffering in accounts of peasant winter life, because it is easy to underestimate pain when it is normalized, and easy to overestimate misery when storytelling exaggerates. The truth likely sits in the middle: harsh conditions, real risk, and also real skill at enduring them through repeated practice. People complain, people adapt, people sleep anyway. 3 light jokes, now softened and sleepy. 1. Your mattress rating is agricultural, but at least it is authentic. 2. You have achieved peak minimalism, and it did not ask for your consent. 3. The room's thermostat is set to medieval, which is not a number, it is a threat. The night continues, your body dips into deeper sleep, then rises briefly into lighter sleep, then settles again. You do not fight the rhythm. Fighting keeps you awake. You accept that sleep comes in waves, and you ride them the way you ride breath. Inhale, exhale, stillness, inhale, exhale, drift. The cold remains, but your body has learned where to hold heat and where to let sensation fade. The morning edge approaches without anyone announcing it. There is no alarm. There is only a gradual change in the quality of darkness, a slight lessening, like someone turned a dial. The hearth is almost dead, but not fully. The idea of warmth still exists in the embers. People wake slowly, stretching stiff limbs, rubbing hands, pulling caps down again as they sit up. Movement returns circulation, and circulation brings that sharp sting of warmth coming back. It hurts, but it is also proof that you are still here. You sit up and feel the floor's cold bite again, and you quickly pull your feet back onto bedding. You understand why people keep foot wraps close, why they slip into boots quickly, why they move toward the hearth like moths toward a small sun. The day begins with reclaiming function, warming hands enough to grip, warming feet enough to stand, warming the mind enough to plan the next set of tasks. Then you let your mind slow, because this is bedtime history, and the goal is not to jolt you into morning chores, the goal is to ease you into rest, even while you imagine a hard life. So the scene softens, the hut becomes quieter, the breathing becomes steadier, the crackle becomes distant, like a memory of sound rather than sound itself. You picture warmth as something small and steady, not a blazing fire, but a gentle glow held in careful hands. You picture the way people find comfort in routines, in shared space, in the simple fact of making it through another night. The cold is real, but so is the human ability to adapt. You let that thought become a blanket in your mind, simple and reassuring. Your eyelids feel heavy, your shoulders unclench, your jaw loosens. You breathe slowly, and the imagined room fades into a softer darkness, more like a quiet theatre after the show ends. The wind becomes a distant hush, the hearth becomes a tiny star, the floor becomes just a surface, no longer a threat, just part of the world, and you let yourself drift, calm and safe, in your own warm space, far from the frozen ground, carrying only the gentle lesson of endurance, not the discomfort. Your breathing deepens, the night becomes kind, the images fade like embers turning to ash. End of script. Sweet dreams.